The sun was cruel that day, the kind of heat that melted tar and made breath taste like dust. In the middle of Front Street, a young woman was tied to a carpenter's table, her wrists bruised, her hair tangled with dirt. Her dress had once been white. Now it was a map of shame. Children threw stones. Old men spat on the ground. Women whispered prayers that sounded more like curses. Her name was Eliza Hart, only 22, and she had been found guilty of what they called lewd conduct. The Decency League stood in a half circle, proud of their judgment. They called her a sinner, a disgrace, a warning. No one spoke for her. No one dared. The marshal's office looked the other way. The smell of sweat, pine resin, and fear mixed in the dry air. Eliza trembled, not from pain, but from the sound of laughter. Someone shouted, "Let her be claimed, or let her rot," and then, from the far end of the street, a man stepped through the heat haze. He was tall, with a coat too heavy for the summer, and eyes that had seen too many wrongs. Caleb Mercer, 54, a retired lawman who had buried both his wife and daughter long ago. He didn't come to watch. He came because something inside him refused to let another soul die of cruelty. Somewhere deep down, he saw the ghost of his own daughter in her eyes, the one he'd lost to fever years ago. Maybe that was why he couldn't keep walking. As he reached the table, Eliza lifted her face, her voice cracking like a dry branch. "Help me. Claim me tonight." The crowd gasped. It wasn't a plea for ownership. It was desperation, the last words of a woman who still wanted to live. Caleb looked around. Every eye demanded he walk away, but he didn't. He threw a handful of silver coins on the dusty ground. "Her fine is paid," he said. "She's under my protection." Silence fell. The Decency League muttered in anger, but the law allowed a man to post bond for a woman under moral charge. He would settle the papers and the bond at the marshal's desk before the hour was out. The rope fell from her wrist. Her skin bled where the hemp had bitten deep. She almost collapsed, and Caleb caught her by the shoulders, steady as stone. For a moment, they just stood there, surrounded by dust and judgment. The crowd watched, waiting to see if the old man would truly walk away with the sinner. And when he led her through the alley toward his horse, whispers followed like snakes. No one in Dodge City that day could tell if he had saved her or doomed himself. And truth be told, even Caleb didn't know. Some rescues start like redemption and end like ruin. And Eliza, her eyes hollow yet burning, wondered the same. Why would a stranger risk his name, his honor, his life, for a woman everyone else had already condemned? The road out of Dodge was quiet that night. The air smelled of dust and hot iron from the tracks of the Santa Fe Railroad. Caleb rode slow, leading his horse while Eliza sat weak behind him, her hands trembling against his coat. The crowd had faded, but the sound of their laughter still clung to her ears. They reached the edge of town where the lamps gave way to moonlight. Caleb stopped by the riverbank. He gave her water and half a biscuit. She tried to speak, but her throat burned. "Rest," he said softly. "You're safe for now. Safe." The word sounded foreign to her. She had not felt safe since the night Eli Tate cornered her behind the laundry shed. He had torn her sleeve and her name with it. When she screamed, his father's men came running, but not to help. By morning, the Decency League had her story rewritten. Lewd conduct, they called it. And the town believed every word. Caleb listened without interrupting. His face stayed calm, but his jaw tightened every time she said the name Tate. The fire between them crackled, and the wind carried the smell of pine from the river. "You believe me, don't you?" Her voice cracked. "I believe the look in your eyes," he said. "Liars don't shake like that." She laughed once, short and bitter. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," he answered, "but I know guilt, and I know innocence when I see it." For a moment, something like peace found its way into the silence. Caleb handed her his blanket and turned away to tend the horses. He didn't touch her. Didn't even look too long, and somehow that made her trust him more. In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the night. She watched its light fade across the plains and wondered if she'd ever ride one. Far from this cursed town, Caleb spoke again, almost to himself. Tomorrow, we start setting things right. How, she asked. By showing them the truth and by making the right people talk. Eliza stared into the fire. The truth had never been enough in Dodge City, but something about this man made her think maybe, just maybe, it could be this time. The moon rose higher, pale and silent. For the first time since her shame began, she closed her eyes without fear. Caleb watched the embers fade and whispered to the night, if hope can survive here, maybe so can she. But the question that burned under that quiet sky was one neither of them could answer. What would Dodge City do when the truth finally came out? Morning came slow over Dodge City. The dust never really slept there. Caleb left Eliza at the ranch with a warning. Lock the door. Don't open for anyone but me. He rode back into town, his hat pulled low, the sun biting through the haze. The Decency League's banners still hung outside the church. Their leader, Deacon Silas Crow, was already preaching about sin and virtue. Behind that sermon, Crow was drowning in debt. The League's donations kept his small bank alive, and the Tate's money paid his mortgage. Preaching sin had become his only trade. Without the fear he sold, he was just another man with empty pockets and no pulpit. Caleb kept riding until he reached Long Branch Saloon. Inside, the piano was out of tune, the whiskey sour, and the truth hiding behind tired eyes. He found the woman who ran the boarding house where Eliza had worked. She was folding laundry, her hands raw from soap. She never did what they said, the woman whispered. Tate forced himself on her. His father paid me to keep quiet. I still have the ledger. That was all Caleb needed to hear. He tipped his hat and went looking for 2 more names. It took him half a day just to get those names whispered to him. Folks in Dodge didn't talk easy, not when the Tates owned half the town. He bought coffee, fixed a broken hinge, helped an old man hitch his mule. Only then did people start to trust his silence. One was a Chinese laundryman, the other, a saloon girl with a scar under her lip. Each story matched the last. Every word pointed at Tate and Crow. By sunset, the saloon filled with smoke and noise. Caleb stepped through the crowd and laid the ledger on the bar. This is your decency, he said. Bought and paid for. The room fell silent. Crow's face turned red, and Eli Tate's hand went for his belt. Caleb's voice cut the air. You move that hand, a boy, and I'll show you what sin really looks like. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered, he's got proof. And then the murmurs grew until the whole room buzzed with anger. Crow backed toward the door, shouting something about lies, but the town had already heard enough. Crow wasn't jailed that day, not yet. Men like him never fell easy. But with the Tate's money drying up, even his sermons lost their echo. Crow's own flock began to whisper that maybe the deacon had more sin than Scripture. But once the saloon talk started rolling, the donations stopped, and the mayor's wife tore down the league's flyers herself. By the end of the week, their meetings drew more flies than followers. Eliza entered just as the sun hit the windows. She walked straight to the bar and stood beside Caleb. Her chin was high, her voice steady. I was never what you said I was, but I will be what I choose to be from now on. The old men looked away. The women stayed quiet. For the first time, Dodge City saw the truth standing on 2 feet. Justice didn't come from the gun that day. It came from courage in a town too tired of pretending. If you're still here with me, take a sip of your coffee or maybe your evening tea and tell me where you're listening from right now. What time is it on your clock? And if stories like this one stir something in you, hit that subscribe button and ride with us through the next chapter, because what happens after this might just surprise you. The sky turned gray that evening. Wind carried the smell of rain and dust across the plains. Caleb knew the peace in town wouldn't last. Men like Tate didn't forget humiliation. At the ranch, Eliza packed a small bag. Her hand shook as she tied the string. You think they'll come for us? She asked. They'll come for you, Caleb said quietly, but they'll have to go through me first. Before midnight, thunder rolled in. The river near Boot Hill swelled, dark and angry. A lantern flickered in the barn as Caleb saddled his horse. He left a second lantern burning near the window, a silent signal for help from the sheriff's men. A silent signal for help from the sheriff's men. Eliza wanted to follow, but he told her to stay inside, lock the door, and keep the rifle loaded. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear and faith at the same time. On the bridge over the Arkansas River, Tate and two riders waited, faces shadowed by the rain, their horses stamped nervously on the wet boards. His father had sent him there, not to make peace, but to save the family name. The old man's fortune came from cattle and fear, and he couldn't stand the gossip about his son. Tate wasn't brave, he was desperate. A boy trying to prove he was still worth his father's anger. Tate's voice cut through the storm. "You think you can shame me and walk away?" Caleb rode forward, slow, steady. "You shamed yourself, boy. I just showed them the mirror." The first shot cracked through the night, splintering a plank near Caleb's boot. He didn't fire back. Instead, he lifted the lantern high, and its light flashed 3 times. Caleb had ridden into town that afternoon, quietly slipping a note to the sheriff's clerk. It said only 4 words, Arkansas Bridge, after dark. The man had nodded once, no promises. Caleb wasn't sure if help would come at all. From the trees, the sheriff's deputies burst out, their coats soaked, guns raised. One deputy slipped on the slick boards, his pistol hitting the planks with a sharp clang. The rain had turned the path to mud, slowing the rest of the riders. Caleb had already taken a graze along his arm from a stray bullet, but he kept his aim steady. Tate saw the blood on Caleb's sleeve, and his courage cracked like thin ice. The rain came down harder, drumming on wood and steel. Tate's men froze, trapped between the law and the river. "Drop it," Caleb said, "or the river takes you before justice does." Tate hesitated, then threw his gun into the muddy water. One deputy cuffed him while another took the ledger from Caleb's hand. When it was over, the storm began to ease. Lightning faded into soft rain. Caleb stood by the railing, watching the river carry away the blood and dirt. Back at the ranch, Eliza waited by the window, the rifle still in her lap. When Caleb walked in, soaked and tired, she just whispered, "It's done, isn't it?" He nodded, for now. She smiled for the first time, faint but real. "Then maybe we can start again." Outside. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the night grew calm. But peace in the west never lasted long, because something unexpected was waiting for them at sunrise, something that would change everything they thought they'd survived. The storm had passed by morning. The sky turned gold over the wheat fields, still wet from the rain. Caleb sat on the porch, boots off, coffee steaming in his hands. He watched Eliza step outside, barefoot, her hair still damp. For the first time since he met her, she wasn't trembling. She looked at him and smiled, soft and unsure. "You didn't have to stay," she said. Caleb sipped his coffee. "Eyes on the horizon? I reckon I did. Some debts you don't walk away from." The world around them felt new. The town had turned quiet after the arrest. Days passed in a kind of quiet routine. She mended his torn sleeve. He fixed the fence she'd leaned on too hard. They spoke little, but every silence carried more peace than words could. Trust came slow, like spring in dry soil. The Decency League had scattered, and word spread that Caleb Mercer had stood up for a girl everyone else turned their backs on. That night, the air grew warm again. Fireflies floated over the porch. Eliza brought out 2 cups of tea and sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, full of things they didn't have to say. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss the life you had before?" He thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But maybe this is the life I was supposed to have all along." A single lantern flickered beside them. The wind carried the smell of wet grass and smoke.